But yeah, so as part of this chat, going to talk about what the road to legalizing psychedelics looks like from my angle, coming at it from a much more commercial perspective here. So just to give you guys a bit of a background on me, co-founder of a VC fund called Palo Santo. We are working on investing across the psychedelic ecosystem. So certainly have kind of a view of this more from the private sphere and what the potential commercial applications and commercial angle may look like within psychedelics. Also, I will say, Nadia, I did a dry run. I went a little bit over. So if you guys have to cut me off, just cut me off on the back end. I'm totally fine if I run out of time here. So first off, an introduction to Palo Santo. So we are a thematic investment fund focused on investing across the emerging ecosystem of psychedelic companies. So we look at anything and all things related to psychedelics. A lot of our portfolio is comprised of biotech and biopharma, but we will, of course, look outside of that at tech-based plays, clinic-based models, site-based models, you name it. We are mid-raise on a $30 million fund. We're at about a third of our target, and we've been 2 months into fundraising, so off to a great start, of course. And like I said, our goal is to target a diverse range of companies, largely addressing the growing global mental health crisis, albeit we do see a lot of applications for psychedelics beyond solely mental health, which I will get into in a bit. To give you guys some of our key criteria, and this is a very 30,000 foot view here. I think that the sausage making is a lot more messy and a lot more arduous, and happy to address that in the Q&A. But in terms of what we look for and what types of companies we look at, we're largely looking at seed and Series A type businesses. So we get in at the ground level with a lot of these companies at the foundational level, helping startups, entrepreneurs, founders get their companies off the ground, which I think is a much more exciting side of finance to be in than private equity or banking or kind of later stage finance, where it's much more just kind of profit oriented and numbers and you name it. So I think a lot more exciting where we play and really helping and partnering with founders to realize their vision and their dream. Also critically, we look for, I'd say most importantly, ethical leadership, as well as experienced leadership. I like to see founders who have some experience in their domain, especially if it's more of a biotech, biopharma play that's incredibly regulatorily complex. So of course, important to see people who have navigated that ecosystem. We of course look for sound science and like to move beyond the anecdotes and really see animal behavioral studies, pharmacokinetic data, a lot of preclinical data to suggest efficacy in whatever compound a company is looking to advance, if it's more of a biotech type play. And then of course, looking for scalable business models. And then I'll come out of the gate and say that we are looking, we are scouring the market for the next potentially multi-billion-dollar biotech play out there. And I can get into that in the Q&A. That's part of the natural power law distribution to VC returns, that out of a portfolio of 20 companies or so, probably 15 of those are going to limp along or fail. And you expect 3 to 5 of those to really be home runs. And that's how you make your returns in this neck of the woods. So like I said, we already have quite a bit of a treasure chest amassed here. We have been actively investing across the universe of psychedelic companies. Here is a look at our current portfolio. As you guys can see, there's a lot of biopharma in there. Wave Paths is one I really like, more on the tech side, which I find really compelling. They're working on, it's Mendel Keelan working on generative music. And we're certainly, we're in Field Trip as well, which is more of a clinic-based model within this field. But a lot of these are really biotech, drug discovery and development plays like Elucis, Bexon, Gilgamesh, Diamond, Tactogen, and Reset Pharma is an investment we just made yesterday, actually, and that's licensing the research of Stephen Ross from NYU. So enough about Palo Santo, just so I'm not a random face presenting to you guys, a little bit about me. Real quickly, as you know, I'm Tim Schildt, co-founder of Palo Santo, not just a face, so a bit about me personally. First favorite animal, big time dog lover, love dogs. This is Coda, for anyone who wants to know the meaning of my entire life and existence. Second favorite animal, Bufalvarius, of course, have to give a nod to that. And but all jokes aside, a little bit of a background on me and my professional experience is Nadia hit on. I come from more the investment banking, private equity side of the world here. My prior experience was at JP Morgan in their healthcare group. They had a big healthcare practice there. Did a lot of work in biotech, pharma, and even healthcare services. Also spent a number of years at Greenhill and Company as well. They had a thriving life sciences practice. Again, looked at a lot more immuno-oncology, orphan drug businesses, but still playing in that biotech realm. And then jumped over to Madison Dearborn Partners, which is a private equity firm based out of Chicago, where I was much more healthcare services focused. So looking at site-based, clinic-based models, thinking about reimbursement, and even a little bit of healthcare tech. So that is enough about me and Palo Santo. I'm going to tell you guys what I'm going to try to hit on today. I may not have all the time to get to these topics, and we of course can punt some of this to the Q&A, but it's really to address some of what I see as the key debates emerging within psychedelics now, especially as commercial opportunities have really ballooned over the past year, and I think carried with them a lot of promise, but also it's certainly that path is filled with plenty of landmines, and I see them too, having spoken with plenty of companies. But first is what I see as a path to de facto legalization via medicalization, and a way to leapfrog the system a bit, rather than going by ballot box or referendum, a de facto path to getting these medicalized and getting these legalized via rigorous FDA or EMA clinical trials.
Tim? I'm so sorry, just to interrupt you just 1 second. We're getting a slight feedback with your mic. I think maybe when it moves, it just slightly judges. I can hear what you're saying, and it's all amazing. Okay. But I think if it could stay a bit stiller, it might come through a bit clearer.
All right, let me try to hold it still.
Sorry.
That's always annoying, so hopefully we didn't lose too much there.
No. It's just getting a bit shaky. I think it'll be fine now, though.
Okay.
Sorry.
All good now?
Yeah.
No.
Better.
Appreciate it. So, awesome. All right. So I think from there, the debate then becomes: do we advance these via a nonprofit route or a for-profit route? And I'll speak to a bit of that. I think both are going to be necessary in this ecosystem, but I think for-profits will play a very large and critical role in the emerging psychedelic universe. And then lastly, if I have a bit of time here, rather than just being a for-profit apologist on this panel, I do want to give you guys a bit of a view of how I see the dominoes falling then within this paradigm if we have enough time. Otherwise, again, we can pump that to the Q&A. So first, to talk about a path to de facto legalization via medicalization, I want to start by looking at the legalization path and how we saw things play out with cannabis, the timeline over which we saw that happen, and I think the long, arduous journey we still have ahead for getting recreational cannabis recognized, at least in the US, at a federal level. So for some perspective, I know certainly not the first major event, but one of the bigger, more recent ones. I'm going to give cannabis the benefit of the doubt, because if you go even earlier to Portugal or California, legalizing this for medical use, that makes it look like it's been over an even longer time horizon. But let's just look at Colorado. Colorado legalized cannabis in 2012. And 9 years later, 15 of 50 states have now fully legalized cannabis. For others, it's in a bit, either medicalized or in a bit of a gray area. But point being, there's still 35 states to fully recognize these as legal substances. It's federally still in a gray area, which makes banking complex, it makes running businesses complex, and it makes investing really complex, putting VC funds and investors in a precarious legal gray area as well. So the point is that there's been great strides made in cannabis, but there's still a very long way to go, and it's taken a long time to get to this point. One other thing I'll point out here is the expense is out of pocket to patients as well and users. So I think that contrasts with what could potentially be reimbursable therapies and psychedelics, making them more affordable. So I'll just point that out. And like I said, I think great strides made, but it's certainly been a long journey to get here. And I still see a long way to go in terms of getting these fully federally recognized as legal substances and allowing businesses to be completely above board. Contrast that with what I see as the potential for a medicalization path. And I think there's some really good case studies of how we can leapfrog the system, working within the rules of the system, but really take a backdoor route to getting scheduled substances legalized, whether it could be cannabis, but I'm going to look at this more in the context of psychedelics here. And what I see as a great backdoor route and a much more rapid route, and one that'll probably allow for quicker adoption functionally legalized. So great case study is Epidiolex, that was synthetic CBD for childhood seizures. GW Pharma advanced these through rigorous clinical trials, and in 2018, upon demonstrating data and showing strong efficacy, got this rescheduled by the DEA, since there was a known medical use case then, and we're all able to prescribe it for any users who had that, the designated indication that this was targeted at. Some other relevant case studies, albeit not, in terms of mechanism of action, not even close to psychedelics or to cannabis, but I think nonetheless still relevant, are other compounds like Xyrem or Marinol. These were also scheduled substances once taken through rigorous FDA clinical trials. They were rescheduled and allowed to be prescribed for the designated diseases that they were targeting. So the reason I bring this up is not only does it allow us to leapfrog the system, and I think it's a much more rapid way to get these to market and functionally get these legalized, it also gets over a critical barrier to adoption, which I say is your grandmother or your Gen X, parents or anyone who went through the 60s and 70s, went through the Nancy Reagan era. And I think for them, they still carry a lot of stigma. And we have to realize that in our groups and sometimes even in our echo chambers, this all makes sense. But for a very large portion of the population, there's still a lot of stigma around these. And for many people, these are no different than heroin or meth in their minds, even though the mechanisms of action are very different. And to Timothy's point, don't want to get too much into my drugs are better than your drugs, but I think that is a reality that, there's just different mechanisms at play here and different risk profiles across different substances. So reason I bring this up is where I think this is important is going through clinical trials, demonstrating robust efficacy is what I see as the best way to get the largest amount of people to get comfortable around these substances and adopt them. So I'll leave it at that. I call that kind of the grandmother problem of how do you talk to your grandma about this at the dinner table at Thanksgiving, at least in America, over Christmas, around the world. And, how do you get as many people to be comfortable using these substances? So there we go. I jumped a little bit ahead on that point. And last thing I will also raise is that going down a more medicalized path opens up the prospect of payer coverage and reimbursability, making these potentially more affordable than having to go out of pocket or having to go to a retreat center or you name it for users. So if we then agree that that the medicalized route may potentially be a better path to go than by referendum or by ballot and going kind of via legislation, I think the next debate that's emerged in this field has been, is it better to go down a non-for-profit path or a for-profit path? And I think there's room for both, but I think for-profits are going to play a larger role in this ecosystem, and I think a very necessary role here. So first off, again, to do a side-by-side comparison, let's look at non-for-profits. So the heavyweight in the room has been MAPS, of course, and I think we owe MAPS a debt of gratitude here for holding the torch on psychedelics really through the dark ages in a period where it was not cool to talk about psychedelics. But to put things in perspective a bit, MAPS was founded in 1986. And by the numbers I've seen online, and Ishmael can correct me if I'm wrong during his presentation, but my estimate is that MAPS has raised about $130 million over the course of 34 years. And a large chunk of that, I believe 30 to 40 million raised very recently via the Capstone Challenge. So large chunk of money over a few decades. USONA, founded more recently in 2014, has raised, by my estimates, and people can correct me if I'm wrong here, I couldn't find a clean number online, but roughly $30 to $40 million over the course of 6 years. So large chunks of change, but I think when compared to what's been accomplished in the private sphere, certainly pales in comparison. So Compass Pathways, not the only for-profit enterprise out there, but probably the biggest name and admittedly one of the more controversial ones. Nonetheless, though, founded in 2016, and they've managed to raise $234 million over 4 years. So much larger amount of money than on the non-for-profit side in a much shorter period of time. And why is that important? Well, it's because clinical trials are really freaking expensive. So the average cost of a clinical trial is anywhere from $100 to $200 million. If I'm not mistaken, Spravato cost Janssen a little bit north of $200 million to get that all the way to market. And that's not even counting the cost for potentially failed clinical trials, which certainly add up to a larger number, but let's just be conservative here. And I think a lot of us have a good hunch that psychedelics will be approved for medical use, given that we know they're non-toxic and we've got pretty good data that they're highly efficacious in the patient populations we're trying to treat. So let's assume this kind of rough number. My estimate, there are 25 plus potential indications that psychedelics could address here. And these are just a few examples, and I'm sure that number is going to go up over time. But you take 25 potential disease cases that these could address times $100 to $200 million per clinical trial, and you get a total capital outlay of $2.5 to $5 billion needed to advance these down a medicinal path and through FDA and EMA clinical trials. So that's a really big chunk of change here. And I think the private sphere has demonstrated an ability to raise a large amount of money in a very short amount of time. So the point I'm trying to make here, and I know I am at the end of my time, so I'll make this quick, but the point I'm trying to make here is I think nonprofits will absolutely be essential within psychedelia. And I think MAPS, USONA, and any others that emerge certainly have a role to play. In terms of the total capital required to get all of these to market for the potential range of indications, I don't think not-for-profits are going to get us all the way there, though. And I think for-profits are going to play a necessary and essential part in the emerging psychedelic universe. So I'll leave it at that. I did want to get to this slide, which was kind of my view of the future psychedelics. I see a number of dominoes fall.
You're welcome to carry on, Tim. We've got some time. We can just eat into the break a little bit. Yeah, carry on.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'll make it quick, so as to not bore people with too much more commercial talk here. But if we kind of accept this paradigm, and I've made the case for a medicalized route and a route where there's a robust for-profit universe, as an adjunct to a robust non-for-profit universe. I think I see good reasons for that emerging, and I think that's the way this will unfold, quite frankly. So if that is the case, I want to give you guys just high-level my view of how I see things unfolding on the commercial side here. And I really view it as a number of dominoes falling, and one needs to fall before some of the others. And so I see this happening sequentially really over the next decade, and that is first generation drug discovery development plays emerging. I would say that's 80% of the companies that we are seeing out there currently are really biotech, biopharma, drug discovery and development type assets emerging. And I would call this, it's first generation, so largely working on the more genericized version of these. And my only comment on this would be that, they're first to market. I think that provides some of an advantage. But as many of you know, the IP position of these companies is rather dubious, given the generic state of these compounds. But once these companies start to get drugs to market and these begin to commercialize, from there, I see a diverse ecosystem of clinics emerging to offer these psychedelic therapies. So a lot of what Field Trip is working on, or Mind Bloom out there, I see many more companies like that emerging once these begin to really commercialize. From there, also, I've looked at a number of companies in API formulation, manufacturing, and synthesis. They're kind of working on the raw base compounds here to be administered. Right now, I don't think that's a very viable business model. I just don't think the market's very large right now in terms of, you look at the patient population sizes just for clinical trials, it's just not a very large market. But once these compounds make it past the NDA phase and they commercialize, I think we can really start to look at synthesis plays out there, and that could be really interesting, moving from chemical synthesis to yeast-based or E. coli-based and kind of methods that are, create less chemical byproducts, or I think are better for the environment, you name it. Furthermore, I see a tech-enabled infrastructure emerging kind of over this clinical ecosystem, whether it's clinic management software, EHR, EMR, as companies like Maya or Osmind are working on. And so, WavePaths is another one that I think will plug in well across the emerging ecosystem of clinics. But I see, a few years out, this really starting to hit its stride. From there, then I think as we get comfortable with these substances and people acclimate, and there's really good FDA and EMA data around these, then legalization waves start to take hold on the more kind of generic, common versions of these compounds that we know. I see that starting to take hold quite a bit more. First generation drugs begin to genericize since IP life is limited on these, anywhere from sort of 5 to 7.5 years, so it's not that long. And then you start to see a recreational market take hold, and microdosing probably begins to popularize as well. From there, I then see more spa-like venues and retreat centers really emerging. And I think what we may see is more of a hybrid model where you have a medicalized system where patients, you know, if you get diagnosed with depression or diagnosed with PTSD, you can go through a reimbursable procedure and get treated for that. But then if you want to go explore your psyche in much more depth, you can go to a retreat center or a spa-like venue, you name it, to go seek treatment, but that'll be on your own dime and really much more of an out-of-pocket expense. And then the last step and the last domino to fall is what I see as second-generation drug discovery and development. And I think we'll start to see more novel, new chemical entities emerge. The profiles of these molecules will be improved, either to shorten the duration of macrodose experiences, take out some of the side effects like nausea, migraines, headaches, you name it, at least as it applies to psilocybin or neurotoxicity with MDMA, to name a few examples. And I think the IP position of these companies will be a lot stronger, and that'll be merited because, of course, there'll be a lot more drug discovery work done, and they won't be utilizing generic versions. So this is how I see the ecosystem unfolding over the next 10 years. Happy to talk about it more in depth in the Q&A, but I know I ran over time, so I'll leave it at that and on to the next person. But thank you for letting me speak, guys.